FromSoft has had an outsized impact on video games as a whole, inspiring an entire generation of developers, so upcoming titles begins with Ronin Trail, an action-adventure style title set in feudal Japan, where you play as a masterless samurai, aka the Ronin, as he travels across the countryside. This takes place at the start of the Tokugawa era and Japan is at peace, so essentially our unemployed protagonist searches for purpose. Samurai can be pretty lethal, so combat looks intense since single strikes can fell your foe, and there is lead up in parrying and blocking attacks to counter, certainly having a more deliberate pace to the combat. This also has survival elements like having to deal with the cold and hunger, as well as to maintain your katana, having one of the most gorgeous voxel art that I have seen, and the news is that this has a release window of May 2025. 2D Souls-like platformers have their place as well, with a neat-looking pixel art entry being Awita Journey of Hope, self-describing as a Metroidvania, but does appear to have some sorts of stamina meter in the blue bar which decreases when you dodge, roll or block, but doesn't appear to be affected by swinging your sword, which is an interesting choice, but you know me, I love my Metroidvanias, so this is of note. This video is brought to you by Chrono Sword, a pixel art action RPG with Souls-like influence in which you play as a time traveler exploring the dark gothic fantasy world of Eldenor. As an amnesiac protagonist, you wander through a time gate only to find yourself in a ruined version of the world in the future and must now travel back and forth between the past and present to stop the destruction of the world. The isometric pixel art is gorgeous, mixing it with modern technology like real-time lighting, reflection, fog, weather and more, but combat is the focus here. There will be weight to your attacks and those of enemies, but the developers are designing it to have an attack-block-attack kind of game flow, incorporating more action elements such as a quick evade dash-like move instead of rolling. The ability to attack cancel, as well as finishing execution moves, special skill abilities and the use of items are all woven together. Exploration looks interesting due to the time travel element and does have some puzzle aspects as you figure out what is different in the two time periods and how to proceed. You have to make critical choices which will affect the state of the world, especially pertaining to NPCs since you can reveal their backstory, but your choices might even turn them hostile. First revealed in 2019, which was when I caught wind of this game, it has been in development for quite a long time and has now released in early access on Steam on December 6, 2024, so if interested, buy it via the link in the description below. Alright, our first 3D third-person Souls-like title in this list is Dungeons Deep, one that pretty much looks like Dark Souls but has some new systems of its own, including limb dismemberment. This is a non-linear dungeon crawler set in a dark fantasy world where you embark on a perilous journey to plunder ancient artifacts and rid the kingdom of its dark creatures. As you explore the depths, you uncover a diverse array of enemies, from orcs to goblins to demons and dragons, each with their unique tactics and behaviors. The combat has omnidirectional aiming, as well as the aforementioned dismemberment, where I do wonder what happens if, say, your arm gets chopped off, whether you can still fight with the other arm, or if it is only a matter of time before you die. There is procedural generation of the dungeons, so there's something new to explore each time you play, but your character is persistent with a skill tree that allows you to shape your abilities and playstyle, along with loot and equipment, including hundreds of items as well as a crafting system. This is planned to have co-op support, where other players might have different motivations as compared to you, so maybe a PvP element as well, along with a camp to build and upgrade with vendors, mercenaries, pack mules and more, and looks pretty promising. Another combat-focused 2D Souls-like title is Crimson Capes, in which you play as the leader of the Crimson Capes, a witch-hunting guild endorsed by the king himself, on a mission to dissolve a conspiracy of wizards. The game starts with you cleansing a village of a cult so that you can hunt down their necromancer leader, but of course there's a larger conspiracy at play in this world. You are wielding a great sword, with combat techniques being realistic as you execute feints, thrusts, cuts and spinning moves to kill your enemies. Also, you will get access to magic, absorbing the powers from the witches that you hunt down, and will be able to use the power of wind and thunder to aid you in battle. Where your nickname is the Tempest and you are the left hand of the king, so how cool does that sound? I thought that Stonemachia was quite the interesting title when I first came across it, since of course it is inspired by chess pieces, in which you play as a lowly pawn that has the power of chess, set in a world distorted by the plague of angels. The world is inspired by Italian art, architecture and folklore, with the audio and voices in this game being in Italian as well, and seems so awesome, especially if you consider the history of that country. As a pawn, you are able to transform into the other chess pieces like knight, bishop or rook, each having their own abilities and powers, although being a limbless chess piece does lead to funny looking walk or run animations as the piece hops along the ground. I hope that doesn't affect the feel of combat, which does look good, having some more bullet hell inspired elements as well. The other big Italian Souls-like, Inutra The Last Song, was okay, coming in at mixed reviews as of recording, so this has another shot to be the Lies of P of their country, where it is interesting to see regional variants of the Souls-like, including titles like Black Myth Wukong, all reflecting their own culture. Another long in development title is VELASTER, a dark and foreboding game that plunges you into a world of unrelenting horror and violence. In these treacherous realms, angels, demons and humans coexist in a fragile state of peace, but the slightest dispute can ignite a devastating war that ravages the land. Against this backdrop, you play as an amnesiac protagonist that simply has to fight against the monsters, surviving against the onslaught of these horrible creatures just to survive. Honestly, I don't know if the developers have really thought about the story or not, but that might not matter, since even the producer on Zelda says that gameplay should be the focus with story to come later, and in that sense, this combat-heavy title is doing the right thing. Since we last took a look, more information has been revealed about the game, including 3 characters in the Knight, the Hammer and the Dual Sword, with the latter 2 named after their weapons, and the Knight being Sword and Board, as they battle enemies and take on powerful bosses. Everything else just seems to be speculation at this point, but for what is shown off here, the 2D side-scrolling stamina-based combat does look very intense, and it's good to see progress being made on this game. PlayStation just showed off Ballad of Antara not too long ago, and technically it should be a PC and PS5 release, but there isn't a Steam page yet, with their official website being rather sparse with the information as well. However, based on their extended gameplay trailer, it does sure look like a Chinese martial arts or wuxia themed one of these, but with more monstrous, almost Elden Ring kind of design to the enemies, with the twist being that you have a little girl riding on a wolf as your companion, which you can call on to aid you in battle. Interestingly, there are a number of Chinese developers making Souls-like titles, as you will see later on, but don't go thinking that it is all in response to the success of Black Myth Wukong, since for them to be able to put out a 14-minute gameplay showcase of this quality, this must have been in development for quite a while already, and given that there are multiple teams working on games like this, China might be the next great source of such titles. I like to mix things up, so I'm switching between games that look like Dark Souls and alternative takes on the genre, with another such title being Bad Boro. I'm not quite sure what the main character is supposed to be, but the aesthetics are of note, being inspired by cartoons of the early 2000s, so you can probably approximate a guess of how old this developer is. It looks kind of wacky, but does appear to have stamina-based combat and looks great, so I hope that we get more news about this soon. Another Chinese Souls-like entry is LUOYANG, one that is set in the Wuzhou period of the Tang Dynasty, which according to Wikipedia was a short-lived 15 years where the first and only woman emperor of China took the throne after usurping her own son. Of course, there's a dose of fantasy in this game, with monsters and demons to battle, in which you play as a member of a mysterious intelligence agency having to fight back against the forces of a cult and maintain the facade of peace in the capital. There are reports of the dead resurrecting as well as demons, so you need to investigate that, but that is all story setup and doesn't appear to have an actual detective investigation element in the gameplay. Rather, this is straight up a Souls-like title, complete with stamina meter and items on the D-pad and all, but does look absolutely gorgeous running on Unreal Engine 5, and you can see how things are beginning to shift in the larger game industry. Another action-adventure Souls-like with a cool look is Duel Corp, a game that has a fantastic art style of having 2D pixel art sprites mixed in with the 3D environment, where even the 2D sprites themselves have some sort of 3D effect as well. This is a Souls-like action title that gives you options, allowing you to explore a procedurally generated world and fight enemies within, having an unrestricted class system so you are free to develop in your own way. The example given was a stealthy rogue wielding a great axe and casting fireballs, so the possibilities are endless as you take on various challenges in the world. There is an MMO-inspired hub area where you can see other players, being able to go on missions in co-op or even battle each other in PvP. No details are given on the story setup, but it sure looks awesome, and as of recording, it technically still has a projected 2024 release window, but I'm guessing it's going to get pushed, but the developer is active and is not a cancelled project. This next title was revealed quite some time back, going back to at least 2022, where Nazralath The Fallen World is pretty sick looking, one of these which is inspired by the works of a famous Polish artist. However, while the developers have been doing interviews, we have not had a proper look at gameplay, so there are only a couple of shots available in which you play as a Dark Souls looking armored knight guy and are fighting enemies. This is inspired by Dark Souls, but might not necessarily have a stamina meter, borrowing from the mood and vibes of the series rather than gameplay, and might end up on the more action end of things, but still a very promising looking title, so maybe we'll get more news soon. A title which was slated for 2024 but got pushed is Light Odyssey, a boss rush Souls-like action game requiring you to defeat a series of colossal enemies, each carrying a source of light. As you navigate the desolate world, you engage in intense battles against these behemoths with an almost monochrome art style and art direction that plays with the idea of light and darkness. I tried this at Gamescom Asia 2024 and the gameplay felt good, where you are limited by stamina and have to dash in, land a couple of shots and then retreat, but also have access to a ranged attack which can be helpful. With each victory, you unlock new abilities and upgrades, allowing you to progress further with some light puzzle elements as well as what appears to be some sort of secret language, Tunic style, which you might be able to decipher, probably hiding secrets of its own. What impressed me the most about this game is the sheer scale of things, since the playable character really is very tiny as compared to the bosses, who do have a range of attacks and abilities, and even multiple stages in the fight that sees you changing locations and will be one to watch. Of course, one look at Shadows of the Lost, and it is pretty much Dark Souls, so I don't think there's any argument here, being a dark fantasy Souls-like, that sees you adventuring in twisted landscapes encompassing areas like the frostbitten ruins of the Norse sagas and the cursed tombs of the Egyptian kings, drawing upon real-world history and locations, but of course with the Souls-like flavour. There is a momentum-based system in combat where attacks, parries and blocks increases this, while getting hit causes you to lose momentum, so there's a precision to the combat which is required. The other main feature that caught my eye are companions which you can recruit, which can help you in battle, making it a less lonely experience and does look pretty good. Another 2D Souls-like title that I have my eye on is Vapor World Over the Mind, coming to us from a Korean developer, and while not quite Lies of P, does seem to have a similar kind of influence. The setting is very different, of course, since the Vapor World project created a machine that enabled humans to travel into a realm of dreams, which itself is constructed from the fabric of their thoughts. But of course, something sinister has occurred, and you have to fight your way through. You play as a young, amnesiac boy who has found himself all alone in the dream world, which has now become filled with nightmares, so you need to figure out their attack patterns, land your attacks, and chip away at their health to eventually take them down. Interestingly, there is a stealth system in this, so you can sneak up on enemies to extract their core, which I'm guessing will feed into the progression system. You have to use items and abilities to take out your enemies, with this surreal world being interconnected as well, so the Souls-like shortcuts system but in 2D. The art looks nice and the dream world is conveyed very well, so if you're a fan of the genre, do drop them a wishlist. Another Chinese title is Echoes of Yi Samsara, a dark martial arts action game that uses elements of traditional Chinese culture, immersing players in a world of rich folklore, customs, and cultural heritage. As the first disciple of the Sword Saint, you embark on an adventure to defeat powerful enemies and to prevent a global disaster, having fast-paced combat that requires mastery of both offense and defense. You need to enter the spirit realm to save the world, but within the realm itself are layers of conspiracy that you need to uncover. Combat looks good and might be more of a Sekiro-like since it encourages aggressive play. Attacks and abilities are also drawn from various traditional martial arts such as Tai Chi and the sword and spear techniques, again expressing their culture in their game, which even extends to voiceover and soundtrack, where I think that Black Myth Wukong really did open the eyes of many to Chinese studios, so people might be more willing to give games like this a chance. Here's kind of a weird one since V.E.D.A self-describes as a Souls-like training game, where my mind immediately went to FPS aim trainer kind of applications which try to replicate the gun physics of your favorite shooter, whether it be Counter-Strike or Valorant, with this looking to be the same for Souls-like titles. Maybe it's a convenient excuse since framing the game as a simulator training kind of program, they don't really need to come up with a story, with this having a sci-fi theme and looks pretty good. I do think that there's a lot more variation to Souls-like games than shooters, so things like timing windows and abilities will be different, but if you're a complete beginner and maybe don't want to face the annoyance of respawning at a bonfire only to then have to run all the way back to a boss, this might be a convenient alternative. The game, however, has procedurally generated maps and environments, so I'm guessing you can train for different level layouts that you may encounter, with a bunch of different weapons, skills, and even an overclock mechanic, so it is rather developed as a game, shall we say, and might work as a standalone title. I talked about isometric action RPGs, but decided to leave The Legend of Capa Negra in this instead, since this is more of an overt Souls-like title. That, granted, still has that isometric camera angle, but the very deliberate combat is more in line with titles in this space. As a new member of the Rebel faction, your first mission is to travel to a small village to meet a contact, fighting your way through treacherous terrain in order to join a war against the king. The skill-based combat system looks like a challenge, having a number of enemies and bosses to battle, although it does throw more than one enemy at you at a time, so things like crowd control and distance management is critical as well. On top of combat, you'll take on quests, trade, gather resources, and craft, having 3 distinct classes to choose from, each with its own unique abilities and playstyles. As you explore this handcrafted world, you'll discover hidden areas, secret passages, and more, looking like a promising entry. Another title coming out of PlayStation's China Hero project is AI Limit, an anime-looking Souls-like RPG that does look like Code Vein in spots. but less vampires and face masks and more sci-fi instead. You are exploring the city of Havenswell, where a mysterious substance known as the Mud has spread, giving rise to monstrous creatures. As a blader, a new life form that looks human but is not, you go on a journey to uncover the truth behind the destruction of civilization. You have something known as the power of branches, which enables you to respawn after death, but these branches are being destroyed, so you are searching for and repairing branches across the city along the way. There's a bit of a Bloodborne feel to this game, since the inhabitants of the city have been transformed into degenerate beasts due to the mud, with a number of impressive looking epic boss battles as well. Now, this is what, at least the 4th Chinese Souls-like entry in this list alone, so in that sense, Sony and PlayStation might actually have the correct idea by funding these developers to secure a PlayStation version that could tip the console war, if you want to call it that, ever more in their favour. A great looking 2D Souls-like title still chugging along in development is Obsidian Legion, in which you play as a hooded character and explore a treacherous island. As a member of a small mercenary group, you are tasked with recovering a mysterious artifact from the island state, but something feels off the moment you step off the boat. Your mission remains unchanged: secure the object and get out, but you might just uncover the truth behind the island's sinister atmosphere in the process. This follows in the footsteps of games like Salt and Sanctuary, but is doing its own thing, having a more streamlined inventory system, for example. The developer continues to share gifs of this game and it looks great, so fingers crossed this releases sooner rather than later. Into Evil self-describes as Hotline Miami meets Dark Souls, so of course I'm curious about this, being a pure top-down action roguelite title with the intentional weighty combat that we have come to know and love. You are exploring an inverted tower and fighting monsters and enemies as you dive ever deeper into evil. There is weapon variety, with each type of weapon having unique movesets, along with curses, abilities, enchantments and more. It's a roguelite, so you will die, although there's no mention of meta progression systems, but there is a demo available right now, so you can give that a try. Another fun looking title is Zwar, where I think that I covered its Kickstarter campaign and might have slotted it into the Zelda style action-adventure game category at one point, but upon closer inspection, combat looks pretty deliberate, so I'll put it here for now. This is set in a post-apocalypse where you're navigating the ruins of a once great civilization, discovering mysterious relics and finding out what caused the destruction of the world. The gimmick is the ability to customize your sword, swapping parts like the point, blade, crossguard, grip and pommel of the sword itself, where you can see the effect of these changes on its stats in the upgrade menu. This is about as close as we will get to Hyper Light Drifter, given that Hearts Machine is making a 3D title now, where this game looks awesome and I hope is great. A unique Souls-like title is Glacier, which I believe comes to us from a Japanese developer, and it is set long after humanity, 65 million years into the future to be precise, where the world has frozen over. You play as a species that has evolved from birds, which sure does look like penguins to me, as you fight to protect the Everwinter, a period of eternal cold that has brought about a new golden age of life, which might be strange to think about since you're trying to prolong this ice age for as long as possible. But then again, as a primarily underwater creature, you would do that as well if you were in its flippers. The creature, known as a Twi, has both avian and dinosaur DNA, being able to control both heat and cold, which is used in combat, with the abilities available to you including high-speed swimming that creates tunnels of supercritical water, temporal crystal blades and more. You are battling giant sharks and underwater creatures, where of course, the concern is how the game handles underwater, given that you have 6 degrees of freedom to move, where how good the combat feels will probably make or break the game. It does look gorgeous however, and we have had new trailers and progress for this game, so I'm inclined to think that 2025 is fairly likely for release. Our final Chinese title for this genre is Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, another Souls-like title that draws upon Chinese culture, this time set in the land of Shu during the late Ming Dynasty, where you play as a female pirate warrior named Wu Chang, who again happens to be amnesiac, see a pattern here, having to fight through monstrous enemies while herself being affected by a horrifying feathering disease, which is literally causing her to grow feathers. If that isn't an impetus for her to try and figure out what the hell is going on, then I don't know what will, with this same disease likely to be the source of the monstrous creatures plaguing the land as well. Interestingly, the game talks about mastering skills harvested from fallen foes, so I'm curious about the leveling and progression. It sure is a very pretty game however, and does have a publisher in 505 Games who also handled larger titles like Control and Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, and have a pretty good track record, with a 2025 release being fairly likely for this game as well. The only game with a confirmed release date on this list is Tyrant's Realm, and is out very soon indeed, being a Souls-like roguelite with, most distinctly, a PS1 inspired visual style that makes it different from everything else. I do like uniqueness, and that is where indie games shine, since they generally cannot compete in the ultra realism space that AAA studios are playing in, instead having to be more creative with their artistic direction, where this game immediately stood out to me. Now, depending on who you are, the throwback look might turn you off, but it is very well done here, and a roguelite Dark Souls does have its appeal. I cannot believe I'm saying this, but we have an honest-to-goodness Kingsfield-like coming in 2025 named Hark the Ghoul, which, if you're not familiar, was the first ever release of From Software, which released in 1994 on the original PlayStation. No, I'm not gonna pretend that I played it, since I was just a kid then, and it was a Japan-only release, so I had no way of getting my hands on it. But if more modern indie titles like Lunacid are anything to go by, this should be of interest. It is essentially a first-person Souls-like dungeon crawler that has you exploring an interconnected world, having stamina-based combat even while in first person, and nails that throwback look, and is one to watch. Watch this video for more of the best indie games.